This is Dom Bettinelli, the CEO of SQPN, with a brief but very important message. For more than a decade, SQPN has produced the Catholic faith and pop culture podcasts that you love. We're a nonprofit organization, so it's only your generosity that lets us carry out our mission. We haven't run a fundraiser in 2 years, and that's why we need to ask for your help right now. Please make a pledge of whatever amount you can afford to help us continue providing your favorite podcasts, as well as exciting new ones we have planned. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give. Thank you for your generosity. May we hear from you today? You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek episode number 23.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all of the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. But today we're discussing the first episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint. Not 4-point, Farpoint. I have no idea where 4-point is, but they didn't encounter them there. Joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Great. This was the first episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. It was a 2-part episode at the time. I don't know if you remember. It runs now, if you watch it on, say, Netflix or whatever, it runs about 90 minutes, I think it is.
Right. Yeah, it's right at an hour and a half.
So this is another one of those stories that got fiddled with a little bit. In production.
A little.
When I say a little bit, I mean a lot, yeah. The writing of it was, like, when you read the story of how this ended up in its final form, written in its final form, it's just crazy complicated. But basically, DC Fontana...
That's not unusual for pilot episodes, because there's so much, stress behind the scenes of the producers. We've got to get this right out the gate. We've got to attract our audience. Everything's got to be just perfect. You've got the writers trying to do their thing, the producers trying to do their thing, the studio with all of its input. Yeah,
you got new actors playing new characters who they're trying to figure their way. And one of the things that happened is Paramount wanted a 2-parter. And Gene Roddenberry wanted it to be a 1-parter.
Which is what the original Star Trek pilots were for the first series. They were 1-parters.
Right. And Roddenberry kind of fought him on that. And they had a script written by DC Fontana, who was the script editor eventually on the original Star Trek and was now on the production team here. And it was basically the Farpoint mystery that we have here.
Right. No Q. Q was not in it.
Right. And so when the head of Paramount eventually strong-armed Roddenberry, one story says he threatened to throw Roddenberry off the lot if he didn't do what he said, which is funny. I mean, and that is not beyond the realm of possibility that happened.
Roddenberry was notoriously hostile towards studios.
Yes, and very stubborn, infamously stubborn. And so he came up with this Q plot, this Q frame story that goes around it. Now, there was initially some pushback against it, I gather, from some of the other writers who saw it as a ripoff of the Trelane story from the original series Squire of Gothos, which has been retconned, by the way, that Trelane must have been a Q, which is kind of fun to...
Yeah, that's in some fan canon and in the
novelizations,
but it hasn't made its way on screen.
Yeah. But I just think it's kind of funny how.
But Q is a lot like Trelane. I mean, he's prancing around in these military uniforms from days of yore, and talking as if he's initially he's talking as if he's a military guy from centuries ago. And he's impish and a jerk.
Yeah. Right. and that comes across so much more in this one. Actually, I found like Q eventually becomes a lot more playful and almost regards Picard as kind of his pal, that he's like this.
I was going to say
pet.
or
pet.
Yeah.
But certainly
he becomes almost comic relief.
Yes.
Especially going into Voyager.
Oh, yeah.
But
here he's very aggressive and hostile, even in his capriciousness, and he's not the fun Q of later. Mm-mm. He's very much a malevolent Q, and I mean he's a lot like a Loki character, Loki from Norse mythology, not necessarily from Marvel Cinematic Universe, which ruins the discussion of Norse mythology. Sorry, but yeah, I'm a fan of the MCU, but it's hard to talk about Norse gods now. So it's just a very interesting like backstory to how this got created, and eventually a lot of the people involved in the production agreed that the Q story, like, and I know Jimmy, your opinion is different, and we can just talk about it, but they thought the Q story was the best part of this episode.
Well, in relative terms, maybe. I mean, I personally would have rather seen DC Fontana's original script produced without the way it got messed with, because DC Fontana is a good writer.
Yes.
And she has a real good sense of Star Trek and what it can be. And Gene Roddenberry is notorious, or was notorious, for messing with people's scripts. In fact, her next script, which became The Naked Now, she actually took her name off of,
right?
Because Roddenberry turned it into a sex comedy that it was not meant to be at all.
Right.
Wait, a creator of a massive world and science fiction enterprise ruining it later? We don't know any other, sci-fi worlds that happens, do we?
If Gene Roddenberry were alive today, would he be messing with the old episodes and redoing them? Perhaps. Yeah. And we'll talk more about Naked Now as we go along. That'll be coming up, of course. So get that to look forward to. Well, one of the things, like with DC Fontana, is in the end, as it's a matter of course, when there's massive rewrites, they send them off to the Screenwriters Guild. I forget exactly.
Right, for arbitration.
Right, and they decide how the credits work, and they did decide that they get equal crediting, equal billing on the script as co-writers of the script. In the end, they decided he did enough changes to merit that, so that he now get, or his estate now gets the residuals for it. So one of the other things that I notice about this, sort of about the episode in general, is the pacing. There are a number of scenes where there's lots wordless staring by characters as other people are doing things on screen, like long shots of Tasha Yar's expression as Troy's emoting in the corner or something, and or long special effects views. And I'm incredible, as I read later, that the producers thought this episode was too fast paced, and they needed to create more scenes to pad out the running time. And I'm thinking, too fast paced? It just didn't seem fast paced to me in that sense.
Partly, I think it's because TV has become faster paced and is more tightly edited now than it was in the 1980s. But also, I think part of it is because they're showing off, because it's a premiere, they're showing off what they can do, and they are therefore using the characters on screen as surrogates, going, "Oh, wow, this is so amazing," as surrogates for the audience. And they did the same thing in The Cage, in the original Star Trek pilot, where we commented on how when the ship goes to warp for the first time, it's this enormously long sequence.
Right.
Because it's the first time.
That's true. You going to say, Father Cory?
I was just going to say, if they thought this was fast paced, I'd hate to see what they thought a slow episode would be like. Because, just the fact that, Riker gets onto the battle bridge of the Enterprise for the first time,
Oh,
and then
yes.
sits there for 30 seconds watching a replay of the first half of the first episode. It's just
Yeah. I had a note, by the way, about that, which is, wow, someone had the time to edit the encounter with Q into a nice little video presentation for Riker to watch later. Like, it was this,
exactly.
it was
and they,
very strange.
And they imply in the next scene when he goes into the captain's ready room that it took him like 45 minutes or something to watch all of that.
Yeah.
Right. It was like a time compression of some sort. Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you just say, hey, Tasha, take him to the briefing room and brief him on what happened and have that all happen off screen? Like, why? That was a very weird directing choice to me. I guess
it feels like one of those scenes that needed to be added to pad out the time.
Yeah, you're right.
I may be mistaken about this, but it may be that's right after the halfway point, and that's their way of backfilling the audience on what happened in the first part if you didn't see the first part.
Right. Because did it air as two separate episodes, or did it air?
I think it aired as one, but it was with the idea this is later in syndication going to be shown in two parts.
Right.
And so they need to have some kind of last time on Star Trek The Next Generation to let you know if you missed the first part, what happened in it. Right.
Because that's actually what it looked like, was a previously on Star Trek The Next Generation, and then Riker gets to watch that with us. So kind of jumping back to the beginning, I did notice one thing is that that opening sequence where we zoom in on the Enterprise right to a window where we see Picard standing there framed perfectly in the window, looking very stern, was actually reminded me a lot of how both The Cage and Where No Man Has Gone Before begin, which is an exterior zoom into the bridge shot. Right. So I just thought that was a very interesting, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it was seemingly an homage.
And in the opening credits, we have a tweak of the familiar couple of tweaks of the familiar Next Generation or original series credits. Instead of its 5-year mission, we now have its continuing mission.
Right.
And instead of Where No Man Has Gone Before, it's now Where No One Has Gone Before.
Right. Right. We get it. We're updating for the 80s.
And then at the end of the credits, we have Stardate 41153.7. Which tells us we're way farther along in time now, because now we've got 5-digit star dates instead of 4-digit star dates.
Right. And when we see an elderly McCoy later, that gives us a sense of, I think, because did they actually say that his age?
137.
137, yeah. Which to me seems too young for him. If this is 80 years later, he was not in his 40s, in the original series.
He certainly didn't look it, unless the DeForest Kelley has had a rough life.
I think we've talked about this before, but wasn't there something about how originally this was supposed to be 100 years after the original series, and then they compressed it to 80?
Yeah, and that would make more sense because, I mean, even by our standards, he had, I don't know what DeForest Kelley's real age was, but he looked like he was at least in his 50s. And you got to think by the 23rd century, people are going to age slower than they do now, at least somewhat. So he should have been, I don't know, 60s or 70s when the
DeForest
original
Kelley
series was
born in 1920.
So 1967, he was 47.
He would have been almost 50.
Late 40s, yeah.
Wow. That makes me feel really old. I'm older than McCoy was. Wow.
It's the same thing in Doctor Who, where William Hartnell was only 56, but wow, did he seem older. People just people aged faster back then.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, and I can't imagine what I would look like back then. I wondered too if stage makeup and all that stuff made you look older on screen too. If you had any bit of wrinkling or aging. It might... Maybe
the makeup and the lights, but it sure seemed. Yeah. I mean, there has been a general youthification, that's been happening.
But certainly, if that's the case, if he was born in 1920, then 80 plus years from the original series,
yeah, it would have been right.
Yeah,
would have been pretty close.
So. One of the things they did in this was, instead of introducing all of the new cast at once, they sort of split it up into, here's a bunch of people, and we'll show you the rest a little later in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We see Riker, the Crushers, and Geordi at Farpoint Station once we get there after the encounter with Q, which is interesting.
And despite the painfulness of those scenes, the decision to not introduce the entire cast at once actually works on a writing level.
Right.
Because otherwise, and they had a ridiculously large ensemble cast to begin with for Star Trek The Next Generation. I mean, things really got better when Troy left and we had one less character. When Tasha left and we had one less character to deal with. But introducing, here are these 8 new people and the villain and the sub-villain.
Remember their names. There'll be a test at the end.
that would have been too much exposition all at the front.
Now, because this show had already been sold, like this is not we need to create a pilot in order to sell the studio or a network on it. Because this was we're producing this, they decided to focus on or to spend a lot more time on building up the characters' backstories. So we get a lot of exposition about who these people are, a lot more than we did in the pilot episodes that they did for the original series. By the end of this, we know a lot about these characters for our first episode. So we get Picard, and he's more stern than he eventually becomes. Like everybody, their edges get rounded over time. I mean, that's just a natural aspect of this. But I gotta say, one of the worst first episodes this is Troy's. Like she was bad.
She looked like she was ready to burst into tears, like
the entire 90%
time of the episode.
She looked terrified.
Even at the end, when she was happiness and joy, and she still looked like she was ready to burst into tears.
I feel
think she did.
Joy. Well, Marina Sirtis would later on talk about how she watched this episode through her fingers because she felt she was terrible in it. So she recognizes it.
Joy and gratitude. And just to prove that, I'm going to say it twice for you, the audience. Joy and gratitude.
And she also had this very heavy accent of some sort, which
is not hers.
Not hers, right. It would sound vaguely Russian or something. It was kind of an odd accent. Data is immediately, and not Data, as Dr. Pulaski will insist in calling him, but Data is immediately pegged as the naive walking computer. He's a bit like Spock, but he's not as wise as Spock.
And by the way, before we get to the problems with Data in this episode, you mentioned the way his name is pronounced, because it gets pronounced, the word in real life gets pronounced both Data and Data.
Yes.
And and they hadn't established how the character's name was going to be pronounced. And Brent Spiner, the actor, had kind of been assuming it was Data. And then Patrick Stewart walks onto the bridge and says, Mr. Data. And it became Data from that moment forward. And
when the captain speaks,
and Spiner has suggested, I don't know if this is true, but he suggested that it actually had an influence on real life, that more people pronounce the word data today than data, whereas before it might have been the reverse.
I wouldn't be surprised if that were true, because these sorts of things have influence.
Especially since most people who are dealing with data are generally science fiction geeks. So
yes,
So but wow, is he badly written in this episode? I mean, he comes across as an idiot. He has horrible lines like "difficult, simply solve the mystery at Farpoint Station," and a query, the word "snoop," and it's like, dude, you're a walking thesaurus. You know this word. And then he looks it up in his mental thesaurus, and it's like he knows this bazillion number of synonyms, including obscure ones like gumshoe, as if that's a verb.
That's something I'm glad they wrote out of his character fairly quickly, is where he would do the query.
Yes, that would have become annoying very quickly. Yeah, I mean, they tried to explain it away where Picard says, Data, how can you not know a simple word like snoop? And Data says, well, maybe it was a human behavior they didn't want me to emulate, or something along those lines.
But they hang a lantern on it.
Yeah, it's just a little too. You're right. It's a little too much. Over time, Data will become a little softened. He's still an android, but he's not a cliche robot as he is in this one. I do like when Riker kind of encounters him on the holodeck later and says, "Nice to meet you, Pinocchio," and which is a fun little moment. In fact, I think of everybody, I think Riker comes across most himself in this. He's the character he's very much like the character he will be, for good or for ill, I suppose. But it's Riker very much so. So,
well, I'd argue Geordi too. His interaction with Dr. Crusher about, and you'll excuse me if I haven't heard this 1,000 times. That's just Geordi.
Yeah,
just how you la da la da la la. You know,
that scene is. But I think in general, Geordi comes across as a lot more tentative and a lot less self-assured than he will be later.
Yes, I might argue that the actor, Geordi LeVar Burton, was probably the best known to a general audience coming into this.
Because he had been in Roots.
Right, because he'd been in Roots. And so I think it's just interesting to note that that of all the cast, he would have been the best known of everyone to the general public watching it. So we could kind of talk about people as we go along. I mean, for me, Jim, you've made this point before when we talked about an overview of Next Gen, was Worf and Yar were redundant.
You don't need both.
They were both aggressive, both come from cultures in which violence was a norm, etc. I was a little over the top. Her outburst during the courtroom scene where
you should get down on your knees to what the Federation is.
It was again too much. They went like one level too high on that one emote meter. But
with her super patriotism, it's kind of nice to see a definitely Republican female character in science fiction.
Sure. So then we get.
By the way, one thing about the redundancy with Worf and Tasha is at this point, Worf was not meant to be a regular character. He was originally just going to be set dressing. It's just there's that Klingon on the bridge, and he wasn't going to have the prominent role he later came to have.
Right. He would have been like O'Brien was in this episode, or Nurse Chapel was in the original series, an occasional speaking part, but not regular. Okay, so we have this encounter with Q. He shows up on the bridge first in an outlandish, 400 years from right, or was, so about the 1600s, a ship captain speaking in Elizabethan English.
But before that, he's put the Tholian web up in front of the ship.
Right.
And they're flying towards the Tholian web, and they're talking about how they're about to crash into it, and the alarm is blaring, and how disastrous it's going to be if they crash into it. And Picard's first order is shut off that noise, not stop the ship. To me, stop the ship from crashing into that thing would take higher priority than shut off that noise.
Right. Well, he has the controls right there in his chair, as we later find out from Wesley. I don't know why he doesn't do it himself. So Q shows up and he says, "You've come far enough. Go back to where you came from." And that's one of the things they said first, is that Farpoint is on the edge of explored space.
Right.
And that's where the Starfleet is about to head out into new territories to explore. And so Q is
beyond Deneb 4, which is like 2,600 light years away.
Right. Which should have taken, we won't get into how they mess with time and distance. So then he looks like a Marine officer of maybe the 40s and 50s. Maybe, I don't think they were still wearing the
60s.
It might have been the 60s, but I think that uniform wasn't in use by the 80s anyway.
It was meant to be kind of nostalgic.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kind of has an American drawl about, you have to get the commies or whatever, which in the 80s was still somewhat relevant, I suppose.
Right.
That kind of talk. But he says 400, at one point he says 400 years before that, you were still murdering each other in quarrels over tribal god images, a line which gets repeated in the Riker briefing video, by the way. So it means that it felt like they were emphasizing that. And to me, what are they referring to? They're referring to the Reformation, which is that time period.
The Wars of Religion.
The Wars of Religion, right? And it's evidence of Roddenberry's hostility toward organized religion. I mean, we've talked about it before, and it's apparent, and we'll note it, and that's just part of the way things are. But
I like how Q freezes the guy who stands up, who's like one of numerous. It's fascinating when you watch this episode. If you count the number of people who move in and out of bridge stations,
yes,
to keep them manned when the main cast moves. Mm-hmm. It's like there's this huge number of rotating people just standing by to sub in for a regular cast member. But one of them stands up in a kind of, I guess, threatening way to Q, and he freezes the guy. And then Q, when the captain says you didn't have to do that, Q says, well, he could have been, would you allow yourself to be captured helpless by humans? And it's like, you're implying you can be captured helpless by humans? What? Really?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He doesn't kill him, but he freezes him, and they're able to revive him in sick bay, apparently, off screen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then Q refers to us as a dangerous, savage child race.
Yes.
Which is a line like straight out of Plan 9 from outer space. Your ancient juvenile minds.
At another point, he refers to us as primates and other things like that. So Q leaves the bridge, and they decide to. This was a bit confusing. They decide to go through this saucer separation in order to at warp to sort of throw off Q.
Yeah, they don't explain it well, but what they're hoping to do, if you watch it carefully, is surprise Q, because they've started heading away from the Tholian web, and Q is following them as a ball of energy, and they want to detach the saucer and get all of the people to safety so they can turn around with the bird part of the ship and attack him using the battle bridge. Right.
Yeah, they call it the star drive section.
Yep.
Apparently, the saucer has warp capability of its own. I mean, they don't really talk about it in this, but it would have to in order to meet up at Deneb 4 with the star drive section, the warp drive section, later on. It's fuzzy. They only ever do the separation twice more in the series. They do it in an episode called Arsenal of Freedom, and then they do it in Best of Both Worlds, which is the Locutus of Borg.
They also do it in one of the movies, don't they?
In Generations.
Generations.
Yeah, when they destroy the Enterprise, basically.
The idea had always been that they could do this in the original series. We just never saw it.
Yeah, one of the things I said is because it basically stops the action. Just the separation. It takes too long, and it doesn't provide enough benefit to the story.
Right. That's why they hype the drama this time, both at the front and the back end. At the front end, by doing it at warp, not recommended at any warp speed, Captain.
Yes.
And then they hype it again at the end, where, like a total passive aggressive jerk, Picard makes Riker manually redock with the saucer section, and it's like everyone's going, "Ooh, that is so dangerous." Yeah.
The whole first. To me, it sounded like Picard wanted to test the new first officer. What's he made of? How does he handle the pressure? But the whole manual redocking, it didn't seem all that difficult. Like Riker just kind of says, a couple of lines, thrusters at station keeping. Okay, a little more. All right, we're done. That wasn't that hard.
Well, and if
this wasn't manual, there wasn't somebody out there cranking down the locks as it connects. I mean, it was still all done by computer control, but it was just adjusting the pitch and yaw.
Right.
And if it were really as dangerous as everyone was making out, you would never do that as a test for your officer. This thing I mean, imagine taking that kind of risk with an aircraft carrier. You're risking millions or billions of dollars in damage,
right?
Based on what your first officer does.
Yeah, I mean, I could see where a captain would say, hey, I want you to dock the carrier, at Newport News, whatever, that sort of thing. But in a normal procedure, like they give them a normal procedure to do. But I don't know. Yeah. It's I suppose. One of the things we'd see a lot of in this episode is several times where we see crew running through the corridors. The only time we ever see men wearing skirts in this on the Enterprise, I think,
and they're mini skirts, just like the women would wear, like Lieutenant Uhura's mini skirt.
Yes, they were not attractive, and I'm glad that they ended up doing away with it. If there were kilts, it would be another thing. If there was
kilts would be another thing.
A Scottish starship would be awesome. Just this starship with just Scotsmen on board.
Yeah, but with really good artificial gravity at all times.
Yes. We don't want things to fly up. Kilt is up again. We do get, speaking of Irish, which I wasn't, we get Chief O'Brien is in this one. I forgot that Colm Meaney was in this episode.
Yeah.
And in fact,
he's in the command section in this.
And in fact, he is one of the very few of the non-main cast who are in both the first episode and the last episode of Next Generation, which is very interesting. There also happens to be one of those background bridge officers we always see this, like some of the same faces. And he's one of those guys, and he's also in both the first and last episode. So good for him for staying employed as an actor through that whole time. So then we have this courtroom scene with Q, and I don't want to go through the whole story step by step because it's not really worth it. But the courtroom scene is semi important because it comes up again at the end of the series.
Yeah, Q is like a 21st century judge, late 21st century judge, after an atomic holocaust, and you have this kind of Mad Max-like environment, apparently, with all these colorful characters hooting and hollering for the Enterprise crew to be judged. And you've got these guys who are the doped out soldiers from the future in the really implausible plushy battle armor, who are like snorting cocaine from little things in their uniform and firing off machine guns that are strapped to their arms.
Yeah, they waste a lot of ammo in that.
A lot of ammo. And given how capricious the judge is and how violent the guards are, it's like, man, if I was living in this post-apocalyptic world, I would never go and sit in the gallery at a court. I mean, it's just way too dangerous. Anything could happen to you in there. It is not worth the entertainment value.
It was Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. I mean,
as I put it, the production design brief for the court would have been Mary Poppins meets The King and I meets Mad Max. I mean, because you had the strange, you had the guys in the Asian outfits, including the little person with the bell. I don't know what Q's getup was supposed to be. We had no idea of what country or culture it was.
And I think that was kind of the point, though. It was a time when things were just completely disorganized in the world because of this post-apocalyptic time. Yeah. By the way, talking about one of the guys in the Asian getup, the bailiff was Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa.
Yeah.
Now, you know him because he was in Mortal Kombat, he was in Man of the High Castle, and he was the Japanese father in the new Lost in Space.
Right. And
it's
he was
the same actor.
Was he the trade minister in Man of the High Castle?
Yes, he is.
Oh, he's Trade Minister Takomi, really?
Yes, it's the same actor.
Wow.
Yes. Wow, that's right. I saw him.
It's he looks familiar, and that's who it is. So, of course, this would have been, I think, fairly when this episode was done. He would have been fairly early in his career.
This was 30 years ago.
But yeah, that was same guy.
That's awesome.
One of the things I find interesting about the court, and Picard he's so passive aggressive through all of this, but it really comes out in court because the guards demand that the prisoners sit, and they have such a huge defiant show of standing just to defy the court. And it's like, this is the hill you want to die on? I mean, you just surrendered to the guy back on the Enterprise in the dramatic, breathtaking, what? A Starfleet captain surrenders at the first moment because he knows that they have no chance of winning. And then you get all haughty about, I'm going to stand and not sit in order to comply with the court's orders?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose there's a prisoners should never cooperate as much as possible with those who've taken them, prisoner. But you're right. I mean, some of that was sheer posturing on their part. I mean, some of the interaction was good Star Trek in the sense of sort of establishing this is who we are as Starfleet, as the Federation. This is what we stand for. And in one sense, that was good for this episode to say this is what the next generation is going to be about, where these principles that Starfleet stands for, that the Federation, that we've, whether for good or for ill, Roddenberry's whole idea of humanity is perfected and we've moved beyond base, aggression and that sort of stuff, which frankly ends up makes for
we have not moved
TV.
on. We have not moved beyond passive aggression, however.
Right. Passive aggression is now the primary means of conflict in the future of Starfleet. And then Tasha gets frozen and defrozen, an unfrozen caveman security chief.
And then when Q winks them back onto the battle bridge, and by the way, the battle bridge is a cool concept, so
yes.
I like that.
I do like that.
But O'Brien is sitting there, even though he doesn't yet have a name, and gets one of the most clunky lines in the whole thing. He says, out of nowhere, after all these people have suddenly reappeared, know anything about Farpoint Station? Sounds like a rather dull place.
Well, the idea is supposed to be that Q has arranged it so that the people back on the Enterprise don't realize that something has happened. That only those who were taken to the court will remember, I think is the idea. But you're right.
He's been talking about, this station ahead of you is going to make an excellent test for a long time by this point.
That who has?
Q.
Q. Right. But I think the idea is that O'Brien is had his memory of Q wiped. I think that's what they're trying to convey.
Well, they don't convey it well.
Yeah,
no,
it's
they
clunky.
Don't. But I kind of agree with Dom on that. Because he was just sitting there doing his little thing on the console and just kind of looks around and what's going on. Right. Nothing.
No. Oh, Captain, where have you been? Or anything like that. Yeah. So they have.
Well, even when the captain says, what's our course? Well, of course we're going to Farpoint. He's just like. Nothing's changed.
Yeah, still Farpoint. Is there a reason we don't have the saucer section?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So they get to Farpoint, and I had to say, so I was watching the Netflix version. They've cleaned up the special effects a lot. Obviously, watching this in the pre-HD days, those effects would have been a lot muddier. This looks very clear, and in fact. It's a very interesting that they have a miniature that they're using for Farpoint. I noticed, not CGI, and
which actually the miniature shows up on screen.
Right. In Zorn's office. Is
probably the actual miniature. I think is what they used as the set piece in his office. Right.
The architectural 3D rendering of if you want. So the Farpoint story itself, it's just not a very plausible idea that, this backwards culture that lives in these mud huts have built this advanced starbase that's perfect for Starfleet, and it's empty and ready to use. Here you go.
And they can't make any more for anywhere else that we might want them. This is the only one they can make.
Right. That's not suspicious at all.
And then stuff just miraculously appears if you want it, Right. And
I mean, to their credit, Starfleet is suspicious of this. I mean, it may be too good to be true, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's true. So let's go send the Enterprise to go check it out. But it's still kind of weak, I have to say.
Yeah, it's badly executed. One thing I like though is when Dr. Crusher goes to quote unquote do some shopping in the kind of market they have there. And when she buys a bolt of cloth, she says, charge it to Dr. Crusher, implying they have money. Yes.
Right. Unlike what Picard will later say when we rescue the 20th century humans from Earth in suspended animation, that we've done away with money.
Also notice that Picard, apparently, when they get into orbit, and he calls Geordi, who at this point is the navigator, not even the chief engineer. He calls Geordi instead of his first officer and has the navigator round people up for beam up.
So here's
Geordi's the one who comes to Riker and says, "Ooh, the ship's in orbit."
So here's what I'm thinking is what you probably have is you've established a some kind of Starfleet outpost. People have to stand watch at the outpost, and so Picard contacts the outpost, the office, and whoever the officer of the deck is, say, and he goes. The problem with that is they never do that at any other time. They just call directly to the communicator of the person they want to talk to. So it's very clearly just an opportunity to introduce Geordi, have him interact with Riker, and then have Riker be like a jerk to him and make him make a formal report.
Yeah, I mean that'd be plausible if there was something like, well, before the Enterprise can communicate with Riker's comm badge, the comm badge needs to be logged into the Enterprise. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah. There are IT rules.
They have absolutely nothing
them.
like that. They have absolutely nothing like that at all. It's just all of a sudden the comm badge works. The Enterprise is in orbit, and now it works.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually thinking way more technically competently than the writers of this series at this point. Exactly. Because later they have the Enterprise get infected by a computer virus, and the writers don't even know the word virus.
Right. I forget what they say. Yeah.
A data pattern thing. Yes. Yeah.
Well, in the 24th century, they call it something else now. Right.
And apparently have no virus software.
I did notice that they don't have the final transporter effect for this episode. I don't know if you noticed that. It's much slower, and it's much more sparkly, more akin to what we saw in the motion picture, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, than to what we get eventually. But the transporter effect is still preliminary in this, which I thought was interesting. Then we have this famous discussion between Riker and Picard on the status of captains on away missions, which is that captains aren't allowed to go on away missions, only the first officer.
If there's any danger.
If there's danger. Right. If you're just going down on a diplomatic meeting.
Which is them addressing one of the criticisms of the original show, because no military commanding officer would have been allowed to behave the way Kirk did.
Right. The cowboy Kirk. Yeah. And it's interesting that they have this, and because they've clearly decided that the producers that Riker is the action hero guy, Picard is the cerebral authority figure. And they've split it in those means. We also get a bit over the top of Picard's lack of affinity for children. It's established here that he doesn't really like kids, and it becomes a thing that he overcomes eventually. With that sort of. We also get the concomitant. Wesley Crusher, let's beam him into a wall beginning. I'm sorry, Will Wheaton, but yeah, it was way overdone. His excitement, his enthusiasm, his wide-eyed, boy about the universe thing.
And then the fact he knows everything about this brand new state-of-the-art ship.
Yeah.
Whose plans are classified.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, his mom's going to be in big trouble, I think.
By the way, one thing they establish in one of the shots of the bridge that this ship, like the original Enterprise, as we saw in The Cage, has a sunroof. Where we get an upshot of it this time, and we can see the stars through the sunroof.
Right. Although sometimes I wondered, is it really a sunroof, or is it just like a painting of stars? Which is a stupid idea, but. You don't need a painting of stars on the roof there to it would be in the soffit. They have a soffit in the bridge. We get this other scene of DeForest Kelley, who apparently was aboard the Enterprise on the way out during the whole Q episode, and is returning to Earth on the Hood, the ship that brought Riker and those guys. And we have him with this nice moment of sort of a passing the baton from the original crew to the next gen crew with Data.
And this is a classic thing when you have a spinoff to have someone from the original series show up in the pilot episode just to wish them luck. It's kind of a cliche.
Yeah, and it was a late addition to the show. I mean, this was they did this very late in the production. And a little bit of trivia: this was DeForest Kelley's final television appearance before his death in 1999, which is interesting. He actually made. Was there one more? There was at least one or two more Star Trek movies, I think, at this point that he was in. But as far as on TV, this was his last appearance.
By the way, there's a interesting scene where they're on the bridge and Troy is talking, and so we have the meeting of Troy and Riker, and they have the whole Imzadi telepathy.
Imzadi.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
Blah blah blah, which is just recycled Decker and Ilea,
right?
But like Picard doesn't seem to notice the long silences as they're talking to each other telepathically.
Well, everybody apparently stands there staring at stuff for long periods of time, so it's not new.
Well, okay, but at one point, I forget who she's talking to, but I have it in my notes that Troy is explaining. My father was a Starfleet officer, and she's explaining her mixed heritage. Right. So she's half Betazoid, half human, and she explains that by saying
Groppler. It was to Groppler Zorn.
And she says my father was a Starfleet officer. So wait, what? Betazoids can't be Starfleet officers?
Or Beta-Z was not yet in the Federation?
Well, but no, I mean, it just the way it comes off. I mean, you're headcanoning too quickly.
Exactly.
They just taking the statement at its face value. Right. She's like, I'm not a full Betazoid. I'm only an empath, and I'm not a full Betazoid because my father was a Starfleet officer, implying Betazoids can't be Starfleet officers. Who knew Starfleet was so racist? And apparently, Troy only got in because she's a half-breed. It's like, we'll take half Betazoids, but not Betazoids.
Right. I mean, she said, my mother was Betazoid. My father was a Starfleet officer, not a human Starfleet officer, not human. Yeah. Right. That was an odd construction that they did. It felt like they were going to fill out some kind of backstory that never got filled out. It was a weird, just say my mother was Betazoid. My father was human. I mean, why not say that? Well, I mean, we eventually do get the backstory, which is that her father was stationed on Beta-Z, and that's where he met.
And we meet a hologram of her father and stuff, but that's not in this episode.
Right. But apparently that was in the writer's Bible, and someone just phrased it badly.
Yeah. So speaking of Groppler Zorn, at one point as the giant pink space jellyfish is blowing stuff up, Picard phones Riker and says, I want you to help me in an illegal act. We're going to kidnap Zorn and bring him up here.
Right.
And it's like, okay, this guy has been begging for your help. Why not just say, come up to the ship with us? And then as part of their kidnapping plot, they go to his office and find him like cowering under his table or something and ask him a question. And he doesn't want to answer. And Riker says, well, if we can learn nothing from you, we'll leave. And they turn around and start to walk out. It's like, wait, you were just going to kidnap this guy.
Yeah.
Well, at one point, Zorn threatens to give the base to the Ferengi instead of the Federation. And Picard responds by suggesting that the Ferengi eat other sentient beings. Like they consume their last,
hope they find you just as tasty.
Yeah, clearly they had a very different Ferengi race in mind. And in fact, I was reading that the writers very quickly realized that the Ferengi just could not be the main enemy of the Federation in this series, because they just were not at all interesting in that way.
Also notice that as the giant space jellyfish crisis is unfolding, Picard decides that's the moment to leave the bridge and go down to sick bay and apologize to Crusher for being rude to her, and then invite her to get the hell off of his ship.
Right,
exactly.
Like, this is the time to have that conversation, really?
Well, apparently he was trying to be nice to her because maybe he reminds her of her dead husband. But yes, not the time to have that conversation. And he puts his foot in it really good with her. That's very true.
He comes across completely awkward.
He does.
I mean, absolutely no interpersonal skills whatsoever. Not even with children, just at all. And how he became a captain with being having this lack of interpersonal skills is a shock.
Yeah.
Also, notice it turns out that Crusher has requested this assignment on the Enterprise, and she doesn't say because this is the flagship or anything like that. That has not been established, that the Enterprise is the flagship. So all the audience knows is Picard was apparently, I mean, he was the guy who brought her husband's body back to her and Wesley. Mm-hmm. He maybe was her husband's commanding officer or something. They at least served together, and her her husband dies. They don't tell us exactly what happened. But then she requests the assignment with this guy. And that's all we know. And this has kind of a creepy vibe. I mean,
I don't know that it's necessarily like it has to be creepy. I mean, we don't know that she blames him for whatever happened. I mean, he could have her husband. And so maybe
I don't think she does. It's like she prefers the strong horse.
Well, I mean, as fans, what do we know? The Enterprise is always the best ship. We know that as fans. I mean, that's sort of established as the Enterprise is the best ship in the fleet, and that's going to be what the new Enterprise is. And so I could see why the Enterprise would be attractive as the best ship, would be attractive for people to request the duty there. So I didn't find that to be odd. I found Picard's sort of trying to get rid of her odd, given that she traveled all the way to the edge of known universe to be on the ship, and now he's telling her to get off. I mean, that seemed a bit odd. You could have done it before. So yes, that was weird. There is one fun moment where Data, they're walking around in the tunnels, quote unquote, the innards of the space alien. And Data's like talking about something, and he stops and goes, "I'm sorry, I seem to be commenting on everything. I'll stop now." Like,
that was nice.
That is perfect because yes, that is the writer's crutch, is having the Data explain everything in exposition for the audience's sake. So I just thought that was very meta. That was a good moment.
Yep. That was nice.
There were a couple weird directorial choices. At a couple points, the director has the camera as the point of view of a character. So when Wesley comes to the bridge, he has the camera point of view being Wesley walking on the bridge, and it was just jarring because it wasn't. This isn't a normal thing for the rest of the episode. There's such a few odd moments like that.
I mean, it was kind of jarring, but it was kind of a effective way to show the scale of the bridge, to show that, you think of the Enterprise bridge from the original series, it's a fairly small area. Yeah. But then you get onto this Galaxy class and you've got, the living room and the dining room put together,
We're going to put the credenza over there on that wall.
Yeah, exactly.
So the other thing that we have in this episode is the first appearance of the holodeck, where Riker goes in to find and apparently,
although it had appeared in an animated episode, but it wasn't exploited the way it will be now with constant breakdowns.
Right, it's a constant source of storylines for writers, and apparently the Enterprise's holodecks are more advanced than anything else out there at the time, because Riker is astonished at the fidelity of the recreation of the simulation, so it's an interesting establishment of this set that we will see a lot.
Well, personally, that it wasn't just holographic, that they make the point of things like the leaves and things were basically reproduced by transporter technology,
right,
within the holodeck.
Yeah, I find it really it's a kind of an annoying cliche to me how everything they want the audience to be impressed with, they have to have the characters be impressed with, so that the audience has it telegraphed. This is impressive, and it's like, come on, these people grew up in this century. Can't they take anything for granted?
Right. Like the whole the Find My Friends on the starship where they have to show Riker how to find data on which
that's so amazing. It's not like they had phones that would do that 400 years ago.
Well, and we never see that again. Like they never show that in use ever again. What they eventually do is they tap their computer. Where's Commander Data? Yeah, Commander Data is on holodeck 4, and they go there. I mean, it's funny.
Yeah.
So
when we get to the end of the episode, they don't blast free the jellyfish that's trapped on the planet. They
direct energy.
They use the phaser array to direct energy to it so that it can absorb the energy and heal. And how they knew that was going to work with this life form they've only just discovered and it's injured, I don't know. But they recharge the transporter jellyfish that's down on the planet, and then it comes floating up, and we get these slow 2001 Space Child, soft focus images of the two giant transporter space jellyfish stroking each other's tendrils.
Hence the PG-13 rating.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it's interesting. One of them is pink and one of them is blue.
Only in the new special effects. In the original broadcast, they were both blue, a hazy blue. In fact, they were very fuzzy. Right. Again, it was pre-HD, but yes, they were not boy girl as they later made them explicitly in the reimagined.
I'm surprised they did that in the remastered version, because it's like, wow, with the racism of you can't be a Starfleet officer if you're a Betazoid, and now we're imposing gender stereotypes on space jellyfish.
Nobody wants to work with Betazoids. They cry all the time. Well, the other thing is, hopefully the Enterprise stuck around a little bit and didn't just fly off like we did at the end, and kind of helped the poor bandy people who were in the city that got blasted into bits. By the space jellyfish.
Yeah, they had kind of the one line of, the Federation will send help. And that's literally kind of how they left it.
Yeah, I know we're on the edge of space. It'll probably take weeks for them to get here, but we got more important things to do. So you'll be okay. Just slap a Band-Aid on that. Wait till they get here.
And then we get down to Picard's final lines where one of the characters says to him, "Oh, I hope all of our adventures won't be like that." And then he says, "Oh no, I'm sure most will be much more interesting." and it's like, that's such a terrible line, but it's like so true in a way that Gene Roddenberry didn't mean.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Ironically, that's the one line where he finally shows personality too.
Right.
Yeah. He actually has a personality.
And then, just like the cage, we get the final line of "engage."
Yes. In fact, Patrick Stewart, for a long part of I guess throughout most of this episode, thought he might get fired. I think he felt like, I'm not really getting this. This isn't my thing. And it turns, and of course, for many people, Picard is their favorite captain. I mean, he really turns into a great character after this. It's kind of hard, because dealing with pilot episodes, as we're doing last week and this week and coming up the next few weeks, they're all not going to be great. And so it sounds like we really dislike Star Trek, and that's not the case. I mean,
we wouldn't do this podcast if we really disliked it.
Right. I mean, what it is we're just we're being honest about the flaws and the good parts of these very early episodes. And once we get rolling, we're good. I mean, there'll still be clunkers. Let me tell you, there are plenty of clunkers in 7 seasons of every series. But the fact is, and more so maybe in some series than others, like Voyager. But nevertheless, there's plenty of good stuff that's coming up. So don't expect that we're going to be down on every episode.
In fact, what we're talking about next, the pilot of Deep Space Nine, The Emissary, is, I thought, quite a step up from Encounter at Farpoint.
Yes. And
Absolutely.
hence one of the reasons why the three of us agree that it's our favorite Star Trek series so far. So any other notes about this episode that either of you want to address?
I'm good.
Just one kind of quick thing is, I admittedly have really never been a fan of the Enterprise D, the design of the Enterprise D.
Yeah.
And it was kind of, as we've been doing these rewatches, going back to the original series and the movie and so on, it kind of struck me why. The original Enterprise is such an iconic design. You can recognize from any profile the Enterprise. And there's a great video that was put out about 6 months ago or so, talking about how the design of the original Enterprise fits the rule of thirds. If you're familiar with photography, you know that.
Yeah.
And the golden ratio, which if you're familiar with architecture, you know that. And the Enterprise D feels like they took that Enterprise, stretched out the saucer section, squished the secondary hull, made big nacelles, and said, okay, we're done.
Right. And it's much more organic too, like the curves.
It's just not it's not as iconic a shape as the original Enterprise was.
And even the movie Enterprise A was I think a more pleasing design than D.
Exactly. And then that's something that just kind of struck me as I was watching this last night, and it's not as good looking a design as the original Enterprise. And I can't claim, this is, bias because I like the original series more. I've watched far more Next Generation than I have ever watched anything from the original series. So it's just the design irks me a little bit, I guess is the way I'm trying to say it.
Yeah.
Interesting. This is one where I don't have strong feelings. The different designs are, I have slight preferences, maybe if I think about it, but to me, starships are wheels.
So
they get you where you want to go.
I particularly love starship design and starships, and I could talk a whole podcast about them. But I agree. My favorite Enterprise is probably the Sovereign class, the Enterprise E that they get after this one gets squished. That really goes back to the principles of the first one. But maybe
I agree
another
with that 100%.
Maybe another time. Maybe we'll have a podcast episode where we just talk about starships. Maybe if Jimmy's can stand it. So let's wrap that up then. So that's it from us on Encounter at Farpoint. What do you think, listener, of this episode, of what we had to say, or of Encounter at Farpoint itself? You can let us know by going to sqpn.com/Trek or to the SQPN Facebook page. Just go to Facebook and search for SQPN. Leave us some feedback on the post related to this episode, or you can send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. Please go to iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or TuneIn. Subscribe to the show, write a review, share it with a friend, retweet it, put it on Facebook. Help us spread the word about this new series, that we can grow our audience and reach new people and grow the community, and we have a good conversation. We really do appreciate that when you help us that way. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing, as we said, Deep Space Nine's first episode, The Emissary. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me in sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Glad to be here, and thanks, Tom.
And Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Don Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, let's see what's out there. Engage. This is Don Bettinelli again. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and that you'll help us keep producing the podcast you love. Thank you for your generosity. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give.